I never imagined I would arrive at my own family Christmas dinner in the back of a taxi, especially when my husband once gifted me a $150,000 luxury SUV that was supposed to be mine for life. But when I stepped inside that warm, decorated dining room, my brother Thomas took one look at me and froze. He asked where my car was, and before I could answer, my son calmly announced that he had given it to his mother in law because, in his words, it fits her better. The room went silent. My brother's face changed from confusion to fury. And then he said something that shattered the entire illusion of family peace. What he did next didn't just defend me, it exposed every selfish choice my son had been making behind my back. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless anymore. My name is Rose Callahan, and I am 66 years old. And this past Christmas, I stepped out of a taxi in front of my brother's house with a knot in my chest I could barely hide. The air was cold, the lights were beautiful, and yet I felt like an outsider arriving at a celebration meant for someone else. That car, the $150,000 SUV my husband once surprised me with, had been my one indulgence in a life built on sacrifice. But it was gone now, handed away like a spare trinket, and I was expected to smile as if nothing had happened. I straightened my coat, paid the driver, and told myself to be graceful, even if I was breaking. Family Christmas waits for no one, not even for a mother whose dignity has been quietly stolen. When she stepped inside, the house exploded with warmth music, laughter, wrapping paper, the smell of roasted turkey. But beneath it all, there was a ripple of confusion. Family members exchanged glances when they noticed she'd arrived alone, without the SUV everyone had admired the year before. Polite smiles covered silent questions. Her daughter in law looked away. Her son avoided eye contact. It was as if the missing car carried a secret everyone knew about except the woman who once owned it. And still, she smiled, because sometimes dignity is the only armor a mother has left. Her brother had never been the type to ignore what others pretended not to see. He wrapped her in a warm hug, stepped back, and with a puzzled frown asked casually, "What about that beautiful SUV your husband gave you?" His tone wasn't mocking, it was protective. To him, that gift meant something: security, respect, care. And the fact that she'd arrived in a taxi didn't sit right with him at all. His question hung in the air like a dropped glass no one wanted to acknowledge had shattered. Before she could answer, her son stepped forward, calm, confident, almost proud, and said the words that sliced through the room like a blade. He announced that he had given the SUV to his mother in law because, in his opinion, it fits her better. No apology, no hesitation, no awareness that he had just confessed to stealing from his own mother. Conversations died instantly. The cutlery stopped moving. Even the Christmas music suddenly felt too loud. And she stood there, smiling politely, while her heart cracked quietly inside her chest. The atmosphere shifted into something thick and uncomfortable. Some relatives stared at the floor. Others pretended they hadn't heard. But the tension was undeniable, a heavy truth that couldn't be wrapped in tinsel or Christmas lights. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to scream. Instead, she folded her hands together and swallowed the humiliation like medicine she hadn't agreed to take. Years of being understanding had trained her well. But understanding and disrespect are not the same, and tonight the line between them finally revealed itself. She had always been the quiet one, the peacekeeper. The mother forgave too quickly, excused too easily, and accepted too little in return. She had raised her son with love, taught him gratitude and respect, or so she believed. But somewhere along the way, he had learned convenience instead of loyalty. Now he stood there proudly explaining how he'd given away something that was never his to give. And she realized for the first time that love, when taken for granted, slowly turns into permission. Her brother said nothing at first, he simply studied the scene. The forced smiles, the arrogant calm, the humiliation his sister tried so hard to hide. And then he understood. Something was deeply wrong, not just with the missing car, but with the way she had been treated for far too long. He didn't explode. Not yet, but a storm gathered behind his eyes, the kind that doesn't fade quietly. Because he might be many things, but he was not the kind of man who lets his sister be disrespected in her own family. When the room finally found its voice again, he spoke with the calm confidence of someone who believed he'd done absolutely nothing wrong. He explained that the SUV had simply been reassigned, as if it were a piece of office furniture instead of a gift meant for his mother. He said it made more sense this way, that his wife's mother needed it more and could put it to better use. He framed it like a practical decision, logical, efficient, harmless. He never once mentioned permission, never once acknowledged that the car wasn't his to give. And the worst part was the ease in his tone, the way entitlement had settled so comfortably into his voice that he didn't even recognize it anymore. Then the woman who now possessed the SUV spoke, wearing pride like a fur coat. She smiled sweetly while explaining how grateful she was, though her words dripped with ownership rather than thanks. She talked about how she deserved comfort after everything she'd done for the family, as if the world owed her luxury as a form of worship. There wasn't an ounce of remorse in her voice, not a flicker of awareness that something sacred had been crossed. And as she spoke, it became painfully clear this wasn't generosity gone wrong. This was entitlement masquerading as gratitude. The rest of the family began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances that spoke louder than words. Small murmurs grew into cautious questions. Who had authorized this? Why wasn't the rightful owner consulted? Why was her comfort treated like an inconvenience while others' comfort was treated like a birthright? Loyalty, the very thread that binds families together, was suddenly on trial. And the one person expected to protect a mother's dignity stood confidently on the wrong side of it. In the silence that followed, memories resurfaced like ghosts. Times when he had borrowed money and never repaid it. Times when plans had been rearranged to suit someone else's convenience. Times when she had been expected to sacrifice quietly because family comes first. It wasn't one act, it was a pattern. A slow erosion of respect disguised as normal family compromise. She realized this moment wasn't an isolated betrayal. It was simply the loudest one yet. Eventually, she admitted something she'd never said out loud. She had been covering for him for years, excusing behavior, paying silent debts, absorbing disrespect to keep peace at the table. She had believed protecting him meant protecting the family. But now she understood that protecting someone from consequences doesn't save them, it teaches them to sink others instead. The confession didn't come with anger. It came with quiet sorrow, the kind that grows only after years of pretending everything is fine. Her brother watched all of this with a stillness that was more dangerous than rage. Every word, every careless shrug, every dismissive tone hardened something inside him. He wasn't simply upset about a car. He was furious that his sister had been turned into a background character in her own life, expected to accept whatever scraps of respect she was given. There was love in his anger, the kind of love that refuses to sit politely while injustice is served with dessert. The evening continued, but the atmosphere never recovered. Laughter sounded forced. Conversations floated awkwardly above the tension. And yet, beneath the surface, something powerful was shifting. A quiet storm had begun, not the kind that shatters windows, but the kind that washes away illusions. For the first time in years, the balance of power in that family was about to change. And it wouldn't require shouting. Only truth, spoken at the right moment by the right person. Her brother wasn't the type to react without proof. The next few days, he quietly began piecing together the full story. Bank records, ownership documents, insurance details, transfer forms. He asked calm, direct questions and watched carefully as answers stumbled. The more he dug, the clearer it became that the SUV hadn't simply been reassigned. It had been transferred behind her back, paperwork signed without her informed consent, with signatures that looked suspiciously rushed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an entitlement written in ink, and with each new discovery, his protective instincts sharpened into something unshakable. He loved his nephew, but he loved integrity more. As he traced more financial activity, he uncovered other troubling patterns. Credit cards opened and maxed out, loans lingering unpaid. Luxuries purchased under the assumption that someone else would always pick up the tab. Responsibility had slowly evaporated, replaced by convenience. And standing behind much of it was the mother in law, gently guiding the narrative so that her comfort always stayed intact while someone else bore the cost. What had once looked like generosity now appeared as calculated dependency. It wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about a lifetime of letting disrespect disguise itself as normal family behavior. The more he listened, the more obvious the manipulation became. The mother in law had positioned herself as the center of everything, the one whose needs mattered most, whose comfort justified every decision. She spoke in soft tones, always sounding reasonable, while quietly encouraging choices that benefited her alone. She had learned to flatter, to guilt, to twist loyalty until it looked noble to betray your own mother. It was subtle, it was polished, and it was powerful until someone finally saw the strings. Once seen, they could never be unseen again. Before confronting anyone publicly, he chose to speak to the son alone. No witnesses, no theatrics, just truth laid bare across a quiet table. He explained what he'd found: the car transfer, the financial irresponsibility, the disrespect toward the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him. He gave him a chance to accept responsibility, to show even a flicker of remorse. But instead of humility, he met arrogance, excuses, deflection, claims that he had the right to do as he pleased. In that moment, something inside the brother hardened. Love remained, but tolerance ended. Rather than realizing the gravity of the situation, the son doubled down. He insisted the SUV wasn't a loss, it was simply better allocated. He claimed his mother was overreacting, that she didn't need luxury at her age. He even hinted that gratitude should flow toward him for supporting the family. There was no awareness, no apology, just ego wrapped in self-righteousness. Hearing those words, the brother finally understood silence had allowed this behavior to grow. And silence would no longer be offered. Meanwhile, she carried a storm inside her chest. She loved her son with every fiber of her being, but love couldn't erase betrayal. Part of her wanted to protect him from consequences. Another part wanted to protect herself from further hurt. She questioned where she had gone wrong, how kindness had turned into expectation. Guilt fought with heartbreak. But beneath all that pain, a quiet realization emerged. Protecting him from truth had never helped him grow. Maybe, for once, letting truth stand alone was the only real act of love left. Her brother didn't act out of rage. He acted out of principle. After gathering every document, every record, every undeniable fact, he came to a calm, final conclusion. The truth could no longer live in shadows. It was time for the family to hear what had really happened, without excuses, without manipulation, without masks. Not to humiliate, not to destroy, but to finally set things right. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop pretending nothing is wrong. He didn't shout, he didn't demand it. He simply asked everyone to sit down at the long dining table, the same one where they had shared decades of holidays and memories. His tone was calm, but there was a firmness in it that allowed no argument. Plates were pushed aside, glasses still, conversations died. Even the children sensed something was different. He spoke slowly, explaining that there were things that needed to be cleared, truths that had been ignored for far too long. No one moved, no one breathed too loudly. She sat quietly, hands folded, unsure whether to feel safe or terrified. And then he began asking questions, simple, direct questions the son had never expected to answer in front of witnesses. He didn't accuse me. He presented. Every selfish act, every quiet indignity, every dismissal and disrespect was placed gently but firmly on the table like pieces of evidence in a courtroom. He spoke about loyalty, responsibility, and the sacred duty children have toward the parents who raised them. Son tried to laugh it off, but the room didn't laugh with him. The mask fell further with every word. The mother-in-law shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable now that the audience she'd once controlled was hearing another version of the story, one rooted not in manipulation but in facts and conscience. Silence wrapped the room like a heavy blanket. Then came the documents. Ownership transfers, insurance records, banking statements, legal signatures, everything printed, highlighted, organized. He placed them in the center of the table for everyone to see. There was no drama, just the quiet weight of undeniable truth. The SUV had been taken without proper consent. Forms had been signed under misleading explanations. Control had been exercised over something that never belonged to them. The son's face changed first, confidence melting into panic. The mother-in-law's polite smile vanished altogether. The paper doesn't argue. Paper doesn't twist stories. Paper simply tells the truth. The mother-in-law tried to recover her composure, but the polished innocence she once wore so easily would not return. Her words stumbled. Explanations contradicted each other. Statements fell apart under even the slightest pressure. She attempted to portray herself as a misunderstood victim, a helpful figure wrongfully accused, but the room no longer believed the performance. Eyes that once admired now looked at her with suspicion. Respect evaporated. And in that moment, the illusion of moral superiority she had lived behind for so long shattered beyond repair. The son, who had once spoken so confidently, now struggled to form sentences. Every justification sounded smaller when spoken aloud. Loyalty couldn't be twisted. Ownership couldn't be redefined. Love couldn't be used as currency. He tried blaming others, circumstances, confusion, anything but himself. But the truth had already chosen its side. He wasn't a misunderstood hero. He was a grown man who had forgotten the meaning of gratitude, and the room finally saw it clearly. Then gently she began to speak, not loudly, not angrily, just honestly. She spoke about the years of small sacrifices, the quiet pain of being overlooked, the heartbreak of realizing love had been mistaken for weakness. Her words didn't accuse, they revealed. Her voice wavered only once when she said she had never asked for luxury, only respect. The room softened. Even those who had stayed neutral now felt the sting of shame on her behalf. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. She was seen. No one announced their support. They didn't need to. It was written in their faces, in the silence that followed, in the way eyes shifted toward her with compassion and toward the guilty with disappointment. The balance that had once leaned heavily against her finally tipped back where it belonged. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't unreasonable. She was simply a mother who deserved dignity. And now, she wasn't standing alone anymore, a truth that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. Your support means so much. And the next part is something you need to hear. The days that followed were filled with paperwork, lawyers, signatures, and long conversations. But this time, everything finally moved in the right direction. Legal steps were taken to reverse the transfer, proving that the SUV had been taken without proper and informed consent. Ownership was restored to its rightful place, not as a gift or a favor, but as a legal fact. Keys were returned. Insurance was corrected. Titles were amended. It wasn't dramatic or loud, it was precise, official, and powerful. And as she placed her hand back on the steering wheel of the car that had once symbolized love, she didn't smile in triumph. She simply felt whole again. Not because of the luxury, but because what was wrong had finally been made right. He had always managed to escape the consequences of his choices, but this time there was nowhere to hide. The family who once overlooked his behavior now saw it clearly. Conversations changed. Expectations shifted. Financial independence was demanded. He was finally held accountable, not just by the law, but by the people whose respect he once took for granted. He struggled, ego bruised, pride wounded, but responsibility is a teacher that cannot be ignored forever. Whether he learned the lesson fully or not, one truth finally settled over him. The world would no longer bend to protect him from himself. Woman who had once sat proudly in the SUV now found her control evaporating. Without the illusion of moral superiority, she was simply another person who had overstepped. Invitations grew fewer. Words were measured more carefully around her. The manipulative charm that once commanded rooms now fell flat in the presence of truth. She had built her power on entitlement, and entitlement crumbles when no one allows it anymore. Losing the car wasn't the real loss. Losing influence was. And it slipped away quietly, piece by piece. For the first time in years, she set boundaries, real ones. Calm, clear, unbreakable. She didn't beg for respect anymore. She required it. Decisions about her life, her property, and her dignity would never again be made without her voice at the center of them. She still loved her son, love like that doesn't vanish, but it no longer excused disrespect. Protecting herself didn't mean abandoning him. It simply meant refusing to be erased. And that, she realized, was the healthiest love of all. Her brother never asked for gratitude, but she gave it anyway, quietly and sincerely. Their bond deepened in a way only shared storms can create. He hadn't stepped in to embarrass anyone. He had stepped in because he refused to let his sister stand alone in a room where she deserved honor. They laughed more now, spoke honestly. We trusted each other without hesitation. She knew that no matter what life brought next, she had a warrior in her corner, one who chose truth over comfort every single time. With the noise finally gone, she began to rediscover the one person she had neglected the most, herself. She drove again. She made choices again. She remembered what it felt like to be valued, not tolerated. Her independence didn't roar. It glowed steady, warm, unshakable. And slowly, the sadness she had swallowed for so long faded into something softer. Not bitterness, not anger, just strength wrapped in peace. In the quiet that followed the storm, she reflected on everything she had learned. You can love your children with your whole heart, but love does not require surrendering your dignity. Respect must live on both sides. And when it doesn't, silence is not kindness. She didn't win because she took something back. She won because she found herself again. And her final truth was simple: family matters, but so do you.